Mercedes Benz has long been known for their reliable, durable luxury motoring. Unfortunately, things have changed in the last couple of decades, and there's some key reasons for that. Could this massive shift come as a result of quality changes from old to new? The stiff competition you're finding on the marketplace today? The excessive amounts of technology buried under the skin of these vehicles? How about environmentalists also play a factor in some of these decisions that these car makers are making? And maybe it's just a simple fact that today is a throwaway society and nobody even expects a vehicle to last very long anymore. Regardless of what those issues are, I want to summarize that for you today. I also want to give you the full quality experience of this vehicle and explain at the end why in fact I decided to buy one anyway. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. Cars like this unfortunately can't even hold a candle in terms of reliability, durability of some of the earliest Benzes. Think about the W124 chassis. We talk about 1986 to 1995 was a production run for approximately 10 years, and that car was bulletproof. Mercedes took a lot of actions intentionally to make that car run forever. As a matter of fact, did you realize that Mercedes actually ended up buying back a cab that was used in Portugal that lasted over 1 million miles? Yeah, that's 1.6 million kilometers. The car was clearly built to last. Mercedes focused on a lot of items that kept that vehicle running forever. For example, things like this didn't exist. Over here you see welds. Back in the day, welds were double sealed. You have every fitting sealed from both sides of a body panel so they tended not to rust. Modern days like this, you risk rust. Areas like this definitely is an area that you're going to see rust once they start setting in some corrosion. But it wasn't all just about preventing corrosion. There was a lot of other factors, mechanical and structural issues. For example, handles were designed to test so many operations and ensure that they're going to last a lifetime. Mirrors, that you weren't going to have this falling off, and the mirror was able to operate day in, day out reliably for many, many thousands of operations. Water pumps and thermostats were ensured to last. They were built of reliable, durable parts so that they were guaranteed to run many, many hundreds of thousands of miles. They also at the time didn't use a turbo, so things were relatively durable there, and things were simple with naturally aspirated engines. Plastic like this didn't exist to this capacity like you're finding in modern day engines as we're finding in this C300. And going in here, every one of these switches and dials was operated so many times to ensure that the full life cycle was achieved with every operation, from knobs and buttons to switches and levers to even your air vents, and all parts and pieces were built to last, and they were run through the rigors of proper testing. So then unfortunately, after that generation of car came and went, they were clearly built to last. Everything was tested from top to bottom all the way around, and then of course they came into the next generation and things started to change. The beans counters got their hands on it because some of the manufacturers and their competition stepped into the game and forced Mercedes like this into another realm of what they considered reliability. They had to start to challenge themselves, and a lot of it meant cost cutting. Some of the steel wasn't as high grade in the next generation of vehicle. I personally owned an ML500 from back in 1999, and let me tell you, the engine was good because that was still old generation with the 5-liter V8. It was rugged, reliable. However, some of the plastics and the car rotted away, plastics crumbled, and the car overall wasn't built with the love and care and attention that you often wished for you had in some of the older Mercedes. Some of the older diesels would literally run forever as well, but things have changed. For example, new cars now are running turbochargers just to compete with some of their competition. They also use a lot of plastic, as we're seeing plastic throughout this whole engine compartment, lots of use of plastic. Now, while some of it's covers and it's not that important, unfortunately, even this is an intercooler for the turbocharger. Plastic exists in this engine where they really shouldn't, and that's what's going to lead to premature failure. We even look at parts like this. We hit a set of railroad tracks, and this panel actually popped off and it expanded the gap. We had to actually take the car back into the dealership and get them to refasten that rocker panel because it popped loose. That's clearly a sign that things aren't built the way they used to be and built to last. Another example of what happened to us personally, take a look. This here as well is a speaker. When we hit that set of train tracks that knocked off the rocker, it also popped this off, and this went inside the panel of the door, and then we had to get that fixed as well under warranty. Now I know you're thinking, warranty schmorranty. At the end of the day, the dealer fixed it, didn't cost us anything. But that's good because we have warranty for 3 years plus an extended, we're good for 6 years. But what happens when that 6 years or 5 years or even the factory warranty runs out and you still own the vehicle? Things like that start to nickel and dime you because what ends up happening, that part breaks If you can't fix it yourself, or you're not handy or don't have the tools, the dealer will have to fix that on their shop rates, and they're not cheap at $200 an hour in Canadian rates. It's going to cost you an arm and 3 legs just to keep these modern day Benzes on the road. They're not built like a Sherman tank like they once were. So the second reason why I truly believe reliability and longevity of these modern day Mercedes have really slipped. And if you look at consumers' reports, they'll validate that for you. They've definitely been sliding down the scale. Even brands like BMW and Audi have been slowly edging their way up, while Mercedes have been sort of sliding down that scale. But some of that has to do with the sheer competition of the matter. These are great cars, but the competition comes from the likes of the Lexus and Acura brands. When they first came out, they weren't the greatest vehicles, they weren't the flashiest. They didn't perform the best either, but they were relatively affordable. And for somebody wanting to get into a luxury car manufactured vehicle with all of the bells and whistles and the amenities, that was another option. And Mercedes had to step up their game. So they also had to price their vehicles more respectively, because now you have these newcomers coming to the block with vehicles that offered all the same features and amenities and similar performance, but yet you could get it for 10, 20, 30% less than your modern day Mercedes at that time. So it forced Mercedes to actually rethink. But how did they do that? Well, they actually had to start cutting some corners. Again, we talk about some of the thinner metals. That's why later models like my ML500 started to rust, because they started cutting corners on the quality of metals that they were using. The quality of plastics also took a hit. And you'll notice in that earlier generation of the late 90s into the early 2000s is when they really took a hit. S-Class Mercedes, which is their flagship, was a car that was known to rust out in short order. Great vehicles from an overall luxury standpoint, and certainly from a technology perspective, but they just weren't built to last anymore. They had to cut corners somewhere. They used cheaper plastics, cheaper metals, cut corners on build, design, research and development, meant that they ultimately churned out vehicles that weren't going to last like they once did back in the W124 era. Now they had cars that weren't always the best cars that they could possibly make. They now made cars with a lot more plastics, and it just wasn't built very well. And for example, back in 2000, Mercedes had the ML320, it was a 3.2 liter V6, and Lexus had the RX300, was about $33,000 versus the $35,000 that you found for the Mercedes. Obviously, Mercedes had to do a readjustment, had to reassess the way they were selling and marketing their vehicles. And of course, again, as I said, that ended up forcing them to cut some costs just to maintain a relative level of competition. So the third reason why, in fact, a modern day Mercedes has literally slid in terms of overall reliability and certainly won't last like the older cars. Remember, the W24 was designed with simplicity, with driving in mind. It didn't even have cup holders. It was meant to get behind the wheel, do your job of driving, get going, and get to where your destination was. Nowadays, it's more about the experience along the way, and that's all well and good, but unfortunately, the more technology you slap on these vehicles, the more likely you're going to start to see failures. I'll give you some examples of some of the things that now the modern day Mercedes are going to start to hurt them in a few short years. Auto folding mirrors, more parts to go wrong there, more technology, chrome, all these parts there are likely to wear out sooner than later. You have a lot of technology here, heated seats, of course, power adjustable seats, pre-programmed, lots to go wrong there. Electrical rear trunk opening, whereas back in the day mechanically that would never fail, or if it did, it was just a cable. Heated steering wheel right there, excessive amount of steering wheel controls, of course all kinds of knobs and buttons for extra controls there as well. These big screens here with 360 cameras are great and they're wonderful to look at, but that is another failure point, and when they do fail, we're dealing with things that could cost $3,000, $4,000 to retrofit. Think about that after warranty. Another issue that these cars have, take a look. We have a sliding seatbelt controller. You notice that. Slides forward when the passenger gets in, and it slides back. So it's comfortable to use, and it makes it very easy for the user. You don't have to reach back and feel all awkward as looking for that seatbelt. But the problem is that movement over and over and over, and the life cycle of that is guaranteed to set a failure in motion right here. There's other things that are going wrong with some of these too. There's already comments about some of these large glass sunroofs coming off the rails or going cockeyed, and then of course they jam up, and that's a big expensive repair. Imagine if it binds, all that stress can actually crack that glass. That's an expensive repair there. Under the hood is another list of technology that can fail. And it's not just about these expensive $3,000 headlights or the illuminated three-pointed star. It's under the hood here. Turbochargers are also a common failure point. It's just yet one more moving piece that adds power and performance, and that's why they do this. It's a rotating piece of equipment injecting pressure into the engine to make horsepower. But unfortunately, there's bearings, and it needs oil, it needs coolant to keep it cool, and that part does wear. There's also a wastegate, and there's a wonderful intercooler. All of it can get plugged off, you get moving parts, and that's an expensive repair when it happens. You also have other technology. Mercedes, in all their infinite wisdom, is looking for other means to lighten the weight of these vehicles for better performance and efficiency. Now they're using more materials like aluminum like this and more extensive use of plastics all over the body panels to ensure that this vehicle is as light as physically possible without going all the way in to creating something made out of balsa wood. But it's not all just a pretty technology. These cars are chocked with a lot of safety features. For example, you've got the lane keep assist, you've got pedestrian warning, backup cameras, all kinds of parking sensors around, ABS, all sorts of technology that makes the car safer for both the driver, the passenger, as well as other onlookers. So the vehicle has a lot of technology that isn't just for the looks and pretty, it's actually there to satisfy modern day regulations. What's the problem with that? Well, for example, you have modules. You have extra modules under the dash there, extra modules under the dash there. You have modules under the seats, in the trunk area as well. All you have to do is peel away some basic carpet and you'll find modules upon modules buried in there. And what's the problem with modules? Well, the bottom line is it's more electronic technology. We all know your modern day cell phones are good for 4 or 5 years and then they're basically throwaway. What about VCRs and DVD players, TVs, electronics, laptops are all only good for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then you want to throw them out. Sometimes they're obsolete, sometimes they just stop working properly or they glitch out and you got to do a reboot. That's the problem with modern day electronics. They have a very limited lifespan, and the problem is a lot of that modern day technology is buried in these vehicles, more than they've ever been, and that's why the W124 was still from a generation when there was minimal electronics, maximum reliability. So it's all this new technology that's clearly going to cost you an arm and 4 legs to continually replacing parts once they decide to start failing, which pretty much they will. That's almost a guarantee. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So the fourth reason why modern day vehicles like this won't last like the old ones did, it's all about the tree huggers or the environmentalists, if you will. Well, they all talk about the polar caps melting. They talk about holes in the ozone layer here, allowing UV radiation in. They talk about global warming, but I'm not so sure that's the case. It's colder than it's ever been around here. But it's the environmentalists that are driving a lot of what's going on in modern day technology. It's the very environmentalists that are putting a lot of pressure on regulators, government officials, and manufacturers like Mercedes that are causing some of these problems with reliability. Why is that such a problem? Have you seen what a lot of the car manufacturers are doing these days? Ferrari going with their V8s, stepping down now to the V6. Now how about even Mercedes? The current generation C63S is a twin-turbo 4-liter V8. Amazing car. And now guess what? Lo and behold, they're stepping that game all the way down to a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo with a hybrid slap on the backside to give it an immense amount of power and performance. So they're actually downsizing the internal combustion engine to reduce and eliminate the CO2 impact on the environment, to minimize that dirty air that we all breathe right now. So clearly there's a strong push to clean the air, reduce the tailpipe emissions, and create vehicles that are less harmful to the environment. Now generally you would think, but look at the exhaust pipes, they're darker than they've ever been. And talk to anybody with a diesel engine in a modern day vehicle like a Mercedes, say for an X5 or a Mercedes diesel, they will tell you that you likely can't get past 10 or 12 years with the emission systems that are slapped on those engines. It's all that emissions technology that's there to capture all that carbon to reduce it from going out the tailpipe, but unfortunately it drastically reduces the engine's lifespan. Why? Because it traps heat in, carbons everything up, and so the vehicle eventually doesn't breathe as well, and those emissions equipment, EGR valves plug off, DPFs plug off, diesel exhaust fluid tanks start to fail. They have heaters in them. A lot of times they fail and they cost you several $1,000s of repair costs. These modern day direct injected vehicles, in theory, are more efficient, but unfortunately there's much more carbon on the backside of the intake valves and the manifold. Now it requires walnut blasting and extra maintenance that you once never had to do now because of what's going on under the bonnet of a lot of these modern day vehicles. So unfortunately, the newer technology and seeking out for cleaner tailpipe emissions is what's literally driving the manufacturers to create smaller engines, more efficient engines, but all for the sake of reliability. And that's unfortunately what Mercedes is faced with right here. 2-liter 4-cylinder engine when the previous generation was a naturally aspirated V6. Yes, you've lost some lifespan out of that and it's less reliable. The fifth reason why, in fact, the modern day Mercedes have literally slipped in terms of overall durability, longevity, reliability. Has to do with the fact that it's a throwaway society. We look at things like our modern day cell phones like this, you get the latest and greatest, and then that's good for about 3 years, and then you want to move on to something new and shiny, like Jojo the circus boy, always excited by the next shiny new thing. Whoa, look at all this nice fancy paint and shiny reflective parts there. So cute. Oh, so shiny and reflective. But it's those things that are getting people all sucked in. The next shiny, exciting new technology is pulling people in like it's going out of style. You know what? Let's face it. At the end of the day, we all want something new and great and shiny. But that's what's actually causing some of this problem. The manufacturers realize it's a throwaway society. Parts are throwaway, they're recycling. We know BMW, for example, is highly vested in 3D printing, the use of recycling plastics and putting plastics back into their vehicles. Yesterday, it might have been a 1 liter plastic bottle. Today, part of the dashboard in a modern day BMW. And a lot of these manufacturers realize that. It's all throwaway, it's all recycle. Modern day lease programs, finance programs are all designed around a 3 or a 5 year program and a rotation. And as a result of that, people get into the routine. Lease it for 3 years, chuck it. Lease it for 3 years, chuck it. Where does it wind up after it's 7 or 8 years old? Unfortunately, the third or fourth owner, usually a young buyer who can't actually afford to maintain that vehicle properly, and that's why then eventually it neglects, goes down by the dodo bird, and you find it at pick your part at the local scrapyard, trying to salvage and maintain your old 8-year-old Mercedes in the way that last young buyer did on that Mercedes before he chucked it out to the dumpster. So it doesn't matter if you're buying a laptop or cell phones or TVs or cars. Everything more or less is designed to be throwaway, other than possibly supercars, where a lot of those wind up in museums or people's personal shelters. Otherwise, most humdrum mainstream vehicles are truly designed to throw away after 3 to 5 years, and they're designed that way. With all these issues and quality concerns, why on earth would I actually buy one? Well, I'll summarize why I bought this at the very end, but first, let's get into the quality experience of this Mercedes, modern day Mercedes. Let's go. Let's do a warm start, see how it sounds. We've done cold starts before. Let's try it the other way. It purrs like a little kitty as you hear the exhaust note. What about under here? Thing of beauty. So that's a quality experience, and so why did I end up buying a Mercedes like this? The car has all the technology that the latest and greatest can provide. It's great on fuel, it's reliable. Some of the older cars, carbureted, first generation of fuel injection, a lot of times you had starting issues. Starting is no problem with these modern day vehicles. They're very reliable that way. It's a good looking vehicle as well. It's always nice to get into something fresh and new that smells great. And that's what this is. That new car smell, great performance, and all in all, it is a Mercedes, and it is still built better than many of its rivals. From BMW, Jaguar, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, Mercedes is still one of the better vehicles in terms of overall design themes, and the aesthetics of the vehicle overall is a lot better. BMW, still more of the same. I feel like it's getting old. Maserati looks great, but try to service one. Jaguar is amazing, but I feel like they're running to the end of the road. They don't have as many models to choose from these days, and quite frankly, I'm not quite ready to get into the EV market just yet. So that takes me to the modern day Mercedes C300, affordable, relatively reliable, full of technology, and that's why we bought it. We love it. And with all of that said, I'm sure you're really going to enjoy a comparison between a modern day luxury vehicle like this as well as a modern day Toyota, and which one is actually designed to last longer. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.